having this type of community that's different than other types of community is helpful to dechurched people. In fact, it's one of the 3 things that they said would bring them back to church. If you remember, they said they might go back to church if they liked the pastor. They might go back to church if there was a good community, and they might go back to church if someone invited them, which is the topic for next week. But I want you to notice that there is an evangelistic nature, right? If you're concerned about the Great Commission, discipling the nations to baptize them and teaching them to follow Christ, if you're concerned about that, you having authentic community here in our church is a primary element of that. That if you have it, they'll want it. That's what we're talking about. If you really have it, then other people are going to want it. And this is why we encourage you guys to be faithful in small groups, to be forming these types of relationships here in a smaller number, because this is too big of a group. We need you in small groups. Okay? And if the small groups start to get too big, we'll make more groups. But you've got to be involved in small groups, because that's where these relationships are formed, where you find those people where you can say, hey, here's my cell phone number. Will you call me this week? I want to ask you some questions, or I want you to pray for me, or I need some advice on some sin issues. Get that going. You need it. Dechurched people see that. They see the church caring for each other, and then they want to be a part of that. Because especially if they've been a part of a church before, they may have a recollection of that. And then they'll know that they're missing it. And they want to get back into that. And I think that's what's going on there. Again, remember, church community draws people together. The word church means to assemble, to come together. And so-called lone Christians are never satisfied, and they're never growing in their faith. I've never met somebody who's like, yeah, I kind of do church on my own, and I'm just really thriving and growing in my faith. Like, those are never connected. In fact, last week, I had a couple share with me after service at Little Rock, after I preached over there, that they're really broken about their daughter because she's not involved in a church right now, and they just see her going further and further and further away from the truth. And most recently, she's starting to compromise moral values, and they don't know what to do about it. And they know, because they've watched it happen over a period of a couple years, they know that it's because she's not been a part of a church. And that exact pattern is what I've experienced in people who have been a part of our church and then have, for whatever reason, decided to go away. And you can't be growing in your faith as a lone Christian. Christianity, I don't believe, really exists outside of a local church community. I don't believe that it does. Community also secures people in the church. That from the outside, sometimes churches look really fun, they look really good, and then you get there, and there doesn't seem to be any way to get plugged in. But if there truly is community, then the community grabs people and it pulls them in. Not in like a weird way, but like in a way that like, I want to be here and I don't want to leave, right? In that kind of way. Because when you have community willing to do the hard work for the sake of Christ, to have a higher purpose than themselves, then you get a sense of security from that you don't have in other places. Listen, communities that exist in other ways, what we might call secular communities, yeah, they exist for their survival and everybody knows it, right? Like if you're paying dues to a community, you know you're doing that so that they can exist in the first place, right? That when there's like hey, you got to come and do your part, otherwise we're not going to be able to X, Y, Z that we exist for, okay? If you've ever had kids in sports and been trying to work with their booster clubs, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, they exist for the existence of the community itself. But we have a higher purpose. We have a higher purpose that is both to experience the love of God and then to perpetuate the love of God. To perpetuate it to each other. And as we do that in good form, to perpetuate it outside. In the world, there are so many broken relationships and broken families and broken institutions and broken communities. And I think that if we can have a healthy community the way that God designed it, that we really have Christ as our head and the love of God as our source, then I really believe that people will find a safety and a security with us that they cannot find anywhere else. And I believe that in so doing, remember the words of James, we might bring back those who have wandered. James 5:19 and 20, I'm going to close here. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and cover over a multitude of sins. And if you've been a member of an evangelical church for a long time, you know that we usually say, you've got to go tell your friends and family about Jesus. But I've been having this conversation with other pastors a lot more lately, and I believe what I'm saying here, that you can go and preach Jesus to somebody, and they might even decide they believe, but if you don't have a church to put them in, then what have you accomplished? And I've been challenging other pastors I know to form biblical community in their church so that there's a place to put them in. Because there's churches out there no bigger than ours reporting hundreds of baptisms every year, and I'd like to know where they're going because they're not members of the body of Christ. And so the love that you have for one another, your intentionality in devotion might be the first and most important thing that you need to do evangelistically. Becoming a part of the body of Christ and loving one another in supernatural, God-sourced ways might be the first and most important thing that you need to do right now evangelistically. Because in so doing, if you could bring back sinners from their wandering, you will save their souls from death and cover over a multitude of sins.